Everybody ready to make some paintings? Do this. Hello everybody, welcome to my studio. My name is Michael Markowsky. Today we're going to make a painting together. Ideally you're going to be painting with me. If you just want to listen to my voice, that's okay too. Hopefully I keep you wide awake. I don't know about you, but I've got a little bit of a cold and I'm hopped up on all sorts of different medications, so this is going to go either really well and I'm going to have a blast, or I'm going to fall asleep onto the floor. So if I do fall asleep on the floor, please in the comments let me know so that maybe if my wife is upstairs, she can come and rescue me. That would be great. So just in a few days from now is Halloween, and I was trying to think of like what kind of painting should we make for Halloween. And one of the things that in my class that I've been teaching in person, when I'm face-to-face with people, one of the paintings that we've made is the Scream by Edvard Munch. The very famous, like from Home Alone kind of thing, right? And we've made that painting. One of the comments somebody said is, oh, this is a really fun painting to make, but it's like really creepy and I wouldn't want to hang it in my house. And it never occurred to me that somebody would... obviously people want to make a painting that makes them happy, and then when they see it in their house, they think is also kind of a happy painting. And I thought like, oh, that's interesting. I guess it is a pretty, it's a guy going through some sort of existential crisis, and maybe that's not something people want to be looking at every day in their house. So I was thinking, okay, in the back of my mind, I'm thinking of a Halloween painting. What could we do? Well, there's a great tradition of skulls and skeletons in art. And then I started thinking, well, we could do a really cool painting of a skull and a skeleton, like a Mexican Day of the Dead. Diego Rivera did a few really great versions of that. But then I thought maybe people don't want a skull hanging around in their house. So I kind of racked my brain, and the artist that I thought of, who I think makes some of the most interesting art out there, but isn't explicitly kind of Halloween-y or horrific, is this artist Charles Burchfield. And this is the image that we're going to paint today. It is a very strange, weird painting, and if you look at some of his other art, it is also very strange and weird. And so this is about as close to a scary painting as I think we could make, with it still being interesting enough that you would maybe want to hang it in your house when you're done. So let me just take a quick little detour here, just to kind of show you a little bit about who he was. An American artist, 1893 to 67, so lived to the grand old age of 73. And what is amazing about Birchfield is that he is unique in the history of art, because he really did his own thing. There's not I can't really think of anybody else who painted like him, even to this day. There's a few artists, contemporary artists that you might say have been kind of inspired by him. But, here's a picture of him making a painting in his studio. And some of them are quite large. You can see this is a larger painting. But another very unique thing about him is that almost all of his paintings were done with watercolor. And they don't look like they were done with watercolor. So let's take a look at just a few of his paintings here really quickly. You can see he did, I would say the majority of his work were landscapes or cityscapes, and they all have this very bizarre kind of quality to them. And kind of like Frida Kahlo, who we painted last week, he kind of created his own language through paint, and he would use particular types of mark making, like zigzags and straight lines or circles, to indicate different ideas, or they would represent different things, different animals, different creatures, different feelings or moods. And that, I think, is I guess one of the things I think is very inspiring about this guy is he blazed his own path. If we go back to like the Wikipedia here, he literally has parks and pathways named after him. And it's a kind of a, what's reassuring about that is, you know, he did his own thing and he found recognition for it. And I think a lot of the times we feel pressured to kind of fit in. Here's somebody who did not fit in at all, and yet is celebrated, and there's museums and parks and schools named after him. And just really quickly, he worked for many years as a wallpaper designer, and so here's some of the wallpapers designs that he did. And when you look at his art, the paintings he made, you can kind of see there's still the same palette, the colors are still very similar, and kind of the unique, like, I mean, this is a very, like, this is such a bizarre wallpaper image for somebody to put on their wall with all these little hearts and then these kind of tree forms, right? Like birds. I don't know. I find him just, he is a absolutely unique character in the history of modern art. Okay. So maybe right before I jump into that, one of the things that has come up a few times is I've been teasing the idea of doing a little show on how to prep your canvases and how to get a canvas that's a little bit smoother than the canvas that you buy, right? So this is just a cheap $1.25 canvas from, or canvas board from the dollar store, right? So, you know, it comes with a piece of plastic, covered it, and it's nothing particularly special. But what it is it's canvas, like fabric canvas, right, that has been wrapped around this piece of cardboard and then covered with this type of material called a gesso. And every brand of paint makes a gesso. And gesso is essentially like a white paint with a bit of a chalky powder that's been included in it. And that chalky powder, what it does is it fills up the weave of the canvas so that ultimately, once you put the gesso down and then use a little bit of sandpaper, in this case here's some 220 grit sandpaper. So I'm actually going to prep one of these right now. We're not going to be able to use it because it's going to take a little bit of time to dry, but I'll just kind of show you, in case you were interested in doing this for your future pictures, how I would just quickly gesso this canvas. This gesso I've had for years, and it is a little bit more fluid than a brand new bottle of canvas or of gesso. So I'm just kind of quickly spreading it onto the surface here. When I opened this thing up, there was a kind of a big block of gesso that had hardened on the inside. And so usually that would be mixed in here, and this would be a lot more solid, less fluid-like than it is now. But I did a few tests the other day just to see if this whole thing was ruined or not. And the canvases, they turned out just fine. So what I'm doing here is I'm just spreading it around, trying to get it to fill in all the nooks and crannies. And the other thing I'm doing is also just trying to get some of the brush strokes to disappear. Now, as it dries, it's going to kind of flatten, and we won't see, as the brush strokes won't be as big, but they'll still be there. Okay. So I'm just going to put this aside. So, you know, a can or a bottle of gesso, this probably cost maybe 20 bucks at Michael's or any art supply store that you can think of. And I'm just going to put the brush in some water to dry. Now, I'm going to set this aside for today. But like I said, once it's dry, what I would do is take a little bit of sandpaper and just kind of go over the surface. Maybe I'll do that next class, although I do have a few that are already dried off to the side. But what that will do is create a smoother surface for painting on. And that will make it much easier to do really detailed paintings. So you don't get that kind of, the look of, even in our, the most recent painting. So this painting I did of last week of Frida Kahlo's, you see how there's still a lot of the texture of the canvas showing through here, right? And if this was a much smoother surface, I wouldn't have that texture coming through. Now, I'm not saying that the texture coming through is a problem at all. In fact, there's many artists that love that texture. I'm not particularly one of them, but if you love it, then keep on painting. Use the, embrace the texture of the canvas. If you don't like it, then putting a little bit of gesso is a great solution. Okay, Jackie just says here in the comments, I just got some Liquitex gesso to prep my canvas. Does it matter if it's white gesso versus transparent gesso? Oh, great comment. No, it doesn't really matter. White gesso just is opaque. It looks white, just like what I was using. Transparent gesso dries not entirely clear. It has a little bit of a ghost, like a slightly ghosted texture, like as if you put white glue on top of it, and then when it dries, it still has a slightly, it's like there's a little veneer of like glassy water kind of quality. I personally use the transparent gesso a lot when I'm painting on panels. I'm kind of tied to here, so I can't go grab it, but I often paint on small little panels of wood, and I'll apply the transparent gesso on top of it so that I can still see the texture of the wood coming through. And then I often leave bare parts of the canvas so you see that wood texture coming through. Anyway, I'm going to do a whole lesson just on stretching canvas and applying gesso and preparing canvas for painting at a future date. I just thought I would sneak this in here because it came up a few times in the last few lessons. So, having said that, let's get to painting. So, we're going to need our palette. We're going to need a canvas, some brushes, and some rags. I don't always use rags when I'm painting, but when I need one, it's nice to have it available, right? It's just like, you know, if you spill some paint onto the floor, having a rag right there to mop it up is really helpful, rather than doing this kind of panicking, oh, what do I do? Where do I find a rag? What kind of rag can I use? Can I use my bath towel? Oh no, it's going to get paint all over it. I don't want to use that. So I'd rather do that thinking before I start painting. So I got one of these here, and I like just to kind of clip it to the table so it's kind of always dangling there so I have it ready to go. Okay, got my paints. So let's look at this painting by Charles Burchfield, and we're going to draw it out onto the surface of our canvas. Again, this is just a regular canvas it hasn't been prepared, because I didn't think it would be fair for me to use a prepared canvas for our class without you also having that opportunity, because you might get a different result than me, and you'd be kind of wondering what magical thing that I'm doing that is separating you and I. So I want to stay on the same playing field here. Oops, let's go to this here. Okay, let's zoom in a bit. Oh, a little bit too far. There we go. So I'm going to draw this image out, and I'm going to simplify it because it's a bit of a complicated image. So to start, I'm going to, as always, I'm going to divide it in half so I can find the center point. And in the original image itself, the center is somewhere right around here. Right, there's this kind of arch that's been created by these trees in the middle. So I might even put that pretty close to the center. Okay, and then I'm going to put the ground about a quarter of the way. Right, so a quarter of the way down here. This is going to be the horizon line, right, where this green, where these trees meet up. So in fact, let's draw this right here. We've got this kind of tree happening here. And then it kind of does another one next to it. And another one next to it. Okay. And then I'm going to draw down here where these two big foreground trees that create another arch are going to be. So this will be the inside of one of them. I'm just going to draw a line straight up. I'm going to draw another line straight up here. And then here's going to be the trunk, or the tree trunk. Okay, so we've got this basic scenario drawn in, and then let's say we've got these clouds in the sky here, and the sun radiating through these dark clouds. Okay, we've got this tree. Branches and stuff are coming up here. I'm just drawing them kind of quickly in. And let's see, there's this other weird looking tree down here. And this log. Again, I'm going to paint over a lot of this, so I'm just kind of, in some way, drawing this out is just kind of helpful for me just to look a little bit closer at this image. Okay. I know there's way more details in here, but I'm not going to have a chance to really... There's no point in drawing them all in there because it's going to get covered with paint anyway. Okay, so what we're going to do now is we're going to put some washes of color on here, and then we're going to, as it starts to dry, we'll work on other parts while that's drying. Okay, so I'm going to get a brush out. So here's a brush, about the size of a fingernail kind of thing, and I'm going to move this out of the way while I get our paint. Okay, so here's my palette. Let's start out by putting some color on the palette. So there's my cool yellow, my warm yellow, and if this is the first time you're watching one of these episodes and you want to know which colors I'm using, it is listed in the image or the video description down below. I'm using these Amsterdam paints here. But there are many different brands that you could use. You don't have to use this particular brand. If you want to know which other brands I suggest or which paints from other brands, I made an entire video. The video is number 0 for this series, and so you can go and watch that to find out a little bit more. Let's put a little bit of white. I love these. Someday I'm going to figure out what to do with these skins. Because if you don't close the lid properly, then they build up and then they dry out, and then you get these. I mean, there must be somebody's got to have made a career out of these things. Okay, so let's. Okay, so the first thing, if we look at the painting, what colors do we want to use? Well, there is this beautiful lime green, like fluorescent yellow. That is, probably the most unique part of this painting for sure. So that's the first thing I'm going to lay in. I'm going to put a whole bunch of that color in this picture. So to get that real neon look, I'm going to use my cool yellow in my cool blue. I'm going to mix them together, and we're going to apply that onto the picture. So I don't have any white or water that I'm going to put on my brush yet. Let's get a little bit of blue here and some yellow. Might need a little more than that. Okay. So that's really green. Maybe too green for now. So you can see how quickly that paint transforms. Maybe this is better. Okay. If I want, I can always lighten it up even further. Okay. So, let's take this and let's look at the original. Where I'm going to put this, I'm going to put this through right up here. I'm going to put it around a lot of this interior part of the picture. It looks like I already need to get more yellow here, so I'm just going to back that out. Part of the reason why I'm not using any water at all is also to help build up a little bit of the surface, just like using gesso, so that it is, it can help kind of fill in those cracks. Let me see. You know what, let's just go right over here. Let's just... Now, I'm not saying that this is how he would have made this painting, but he probably would have done something similar, especially because he's using watercolors. And watercolors, I think, are really the most difficult art medium to master. And the great irony is it's usually the first thing that we give to children to teach them how to paint. Mostly just because watercolors are, especially like student grade watercolors, are really are very easy to set up and clean up, and if there's spills, they're pretty easy to deal with. But you may or may not know that there is advanced, like, artist grade watercolors that come in tubes rather than in blocks. And those things, they're a lot of fun to use, but they are very, very hard to master. So, probably the greatest watercolorist of all is a fellow named Turner, JMW Turner. Now, what does JMW Turner stand for? I can't remember, but he is probably the most famous or beloved British artist of all time. So, and I saw an exhibition of his watercolors years ago when I was a student at the Royal College of Art in London, England. And it blew my mind so much that I basically just swore off of watercolors from then. I was just like, man, it's like being a basketball player and playing against Michael Jordan, or and you're just like, wow, I give up. That's, I don't know how, I'll never be at that level. So, okay. I'm going to clean this brush. The reason why I left this little strip here is that these trees, or these big two trees, are in the foreground. So I'm going to use a different color for them, just so that it really helps separate those trees from the background, which is what a lot of this is comprised of. Well, somebody want to place bets on how long it takes before my voice gives out here. I was thinking before classes, you know what? Probably the last hour of this video is going to be like pantomime as my voice gives out. Let's see. Okay. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to paint, let's look at the original here. I'm going to paint in some cool blue, kind of down to here for the background. And then I'm going to paint some warm yellow into the foreground here. So I'm just going to take some cool blue, a little bit of white actually, just so it's not too dark. Okay. Just put that. Okay. And I'm making this up as I go along here in terms of how I'm approaching this painting. So again, I always say to people, this is not a lesson on how to paint like these artists. This is just how I, given a couple of hours of like as a challenge to paint this painting, how I would proceed with this task. So I forgot to kind of draw in, there's this kind of shape inside here. I'm going to try to use, I know this paint is not dry yet, so it's going to go a little greenish, but I'm just going to apply a bit of it right on top here. And I'm going to do something similar up here on the top in these clouds. Okay, that looks pretty good. So let's clean this brush off. Deborah says, can I use white gesso to cover old canvases that have been painted on before to recycle them again? With gusto. Great question. And you know, I don't know, and there's a few reasons for that, because I've never done it before. But also, it would also really depend on whether the canvas that you're painting on before was had been painted with acrylic or oil paint. Because if you have a oil paint and then you put acrylic paint on top of it, acrylic gesso, and most gesso is acrylic base. I do have some oil-based gesso, but if you put acrylic-based gesso on top of an oil paint, then the oil paint is going to resist the acrylic, and it's going to crack and maybe even peel or fall right off, right? So in other words, if you went to a thrift shop and you bought a random painting and you took it home, you have no idea whether it's acrylic or oil, and then you start painting oil paint on top of it and it turns out to be oil paint, then you could have like a big problem where the paint flakes off. If you, however, own the painting and you painted it and you know it was painted with acrylic, I would say it's possible that you could put white gesso over it, But you know, what I would do is, a lot of paint manufacturers are really, I mean, I visited a number of these companies, and whenever I'm traveling and I have the opportunity, I call up somebody from the company. Usually there's like 5 or 6 people in some of these large companies. You expect them to have thousands of people working there. Often it's just like a warehouse with like 3 or 4 people working there, 1 or 2 people who make the paint, and you can go and visit and do a little tour of it. My wife and I, when we were in Portland a few years ago, we went to visit the Gamblin Paint Company, which is the brand of oil paints that I use. And it was a fantastic experience. They walked us around, they showed us making the paints and seeing all that paint going through the grinders and the presses is so cool. Okay. So yeah, you can go, I'm just going to use some warm yellow here for the foreground, as I mentioned before. So yeah, you can go, you can call them up or visit them, and you can ask them, and usually those people that work there are very knowledgeable. You know, they either are working there because they started the company themselves, or they're working there because they get fantastic discounts on paint. And so they're usually artists themselves, and they're usually very happy to answer any kind of questions. And usually they know quite a lot about the chemical qualities of the paint and how you can use them. So I don't know if that answers the question, but if I was to do that, I would probably call the company and ask them, like, if you've got some gesso, and say, hey, can I paint this onto a painting? And probably they would say very similar things to what I just said, is that, well, maybe the first question is, did you paint that original painting? Do you know what it was? Is it an oil or acrylic painting? And so if you know that, that's really helpful. They would probably say you and then if you had painted with acrylic paint, and then you wanted to put acrylic gesso over top of it, they'd probably say yeah. They probably wouldn't recommend it, I don't think. I don't know. Honestly, I'm not quite sure. It's a great question. So you got me stumped, for sure. Okay. I think they would probably say, you know what, it's probably better idea just to go and start a new painting from scratch. That way you don't ever have to worry about any kind of problems later on. That would be my guess. Okay. And this looks like a very Halloween brew, doesn't it? My slime goblet. Okay. So, I'm just gonna wipe my runny nose here as delicately as possible off camera. Okay. So everything's drying right now, and I'm looking at this picture. Some of the blue is already dry. Some of the green is still drying a bit, and obviously the warm yellow that we put on there last is still quite wet. So, what we're going to do is we're going to mix a gray, and we're going to paint some gray over a lot of the painting. And that's going to kind of bring this back into a bit more of a wintry scene than what we currently have. And then we're going to paint some of the darker colors for these trees. And yeah, so let's get a gray mixed up here. So, to make a gray. And there's different kinds of, maybe it's worth taking a look at the color wheel here. Let's just move. All my painting drying surfaces are covered with drying paintings. Okay. So how we mix a gray, obviously we could use black and white to do it. But if you've seen any of the previous episodes, I try as much as possible to resist just going to the black, or to the black and white to mix a gray, or even black at all, and try to see if I can use my color wheel to mix a gray. What we've talked about before, I think this is in episode 2 or 3, was the neutral core. And the neutral core is what happens when we're mixing colors across the color wheel, right? So when colors are close to one another on the outside of the color wheel, we get very intense, bright, saturated colors, right? Like we just got with the this kind of neon green orange. That was created by painting the cool yellow and the cool blue. So they're right next to one another on the color wheel. So the resulting greens are going to be super saturated, bright neon colors. We could obviously get a very different green, and we will do later on in this painting, if we mixed the warm yellow and the warm blue. So that's how we get a little bit more of kind of like your fall grass green, right? Where the grass is starting to die and it's starting to kind of go brown, right? Then we're going to move towards the neutral core. And you can see just these two colors mixed together get a less saturated, a desaturated, less intense color, right? Because it's closer to the middle. So to increase that, because these are kind of, you know, going beside this, right? So you imagine this is an iceberg and this is the Titanic. This is the Titanic coming by, and it just kind of glances off the side of the iceberg and tears a hole in it, and it still sinks. But let's say we want to run straight into the iceberg. Well, what we would want to do is we want to go right into this middle. But how do we get into the middle? Well, you'll notice if I mix a purple, let's say we mix these two colors, and then we go right up the middle. Here's going to be a gray, a really dark brownish gray. If we take let's say this green, the same green we just used here, and we mix it across the color wheel with a red, we're going to get that. If we take an orange, right, kind of like if we take this warm yellow we painted here with a warm red, we'll get an orange, and we mix it with a blue, we'll get a gray or a really dark color, right? So that's what we're going to do. Basically, you're just thinking about mixing things across the color wheel. And there's no way to do this without using 3 colors, right? Because one thing you notice, well, if I mix these 2 colors, there's 2 colors, I'm going to get close to the neutral core, but I'm not going to get there, right? If I mix any 2 colors, right, all of these these are 2 colors that mix 1 plus 1, so there's 3. Do you see how that works? There always needs to be 3 colors. Always needs to have 1 yellow, 1 red, and 1 blue. Okay. So part of so what we want to ask yourself is, what kind of a gray do I want to make? Do I want to make a purplish gray, or do I want to make an orangish gray, a brownish gray, a reddish gray, and so on and so forth, right? And so let's look at this painting. What kind of a gray do I want to make? Now, it's kind of hard to see. It's not like really predominantly one color or another. So he's like right in the middle of the neutral core. So in this instance, we could pretty much take any of those combinations of paint, and as long as there's an equal amount of all 3 of them, we're going to be right in the center of the neutral core. But if we wanted, so let's do this and we'll demonstrate how it works, right? So let's say I'm going to mix a purple, right? So the warm blue and the cool red. So if we take this color, we take this color. I probably put a little too much blue on there. It's pretty dark. So this will be more of a blue violet. If we take that color, you can see it's a pretty dark, intense violet. It's probably because there's a little bit too much blue. And then right on the other side of the color wheel is our warm yellow. And let's get a little bit more warm yellow on here. Or cool yellow. Either one is going to be fine. But let's take a little bit of this. And if we mix this in here, see how we get this kind of brownish color. Right now it looks a little bit more like a purplish brown, right? So if I add a little more yellow into here, now it's becoming more and more of a brown. And it kind of just looks like a bit of a muddy-ish kind of color. All right, this kind of has the look of like a dried scab or something, right? Dried blood scab. So that means there's a lot of red in there. We could add a little bit more blue. Kind of making this muddy kind of color. So if we take that, and then we take some white, and we mix this in here, then we have a bit of a purpley gray kind of quality. And the more white we put in there, the more we tint this color, the more it starts to look just like a plain old gray. But we know that it's not plain gray. It's got a bit of a purplish kind of quality to it. So let's go back to our painting. We've got this nice kind of unique gray that we've mixed ourselves. And we're going to paint that into this picture. I'm just looking to see if that's dry. Okay. Looks dry enough, I think. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add just a little bit of water in here, just to thin it out a little bit. So it's like I'm just grabbing some water on my brush. Maybe I'll just show this. So I got water on my brush. And this is just going to thin it out a little bit and make it a little bit more transparent. Okay, and let's look at his painting again here. And then we'll paint this on top. And in fact, I'm going to get a smaller brush out for this. And I'm sort of just kind of, I'm going to sort of detail some branches. I'm going to imagine there's some branches in some of these places here. Now I know that there's a bunch of trees in this forest here. I'm not really even going to worry about painting those trees exactly. Come back with my larger brush over top of all of this. So I'm just giving a little bit of a halo around this tree like he has. What was I doing here? Here Also, you know, I am playing pretty fast and loose with his image. So I'm hardly looking at it. I'm just sort of, you know, I glance up at it every once in a while to see if I'm kind of in the ballpark, but I'm not worried about reproducing it exactly. You know, my gray here is also very purpley. So if that drives you crazy, I totally get it. You could just use a plain old gray. We'll see how this one turns out. This is, again, I didn't have a plan when I started it, so it's sort of like I'm on a game show and, okay, let's paint this as quickly as possible. Oh, okay. So. Oops, that's a little bit too much white in there. So I just added a little bit too much white. I was going to lighten that up, but... Definitely very Halloween-y colors, eh? Greens and oranges and grays, purples. Okay, I'm just going to go a little bit darker here for these trees in the foreground. My goodness. Okay. So let's let's start painting in a little bit more detail here. So I'm going to mix another. Actually, maybe I'm just going to clean some of this gray off my brushes here. So one of the qualities of watercolor paint is the layering and layering of paint, because watercolor is pretty much purely a additive process, right? It's very hard with watercolor to lighten the picture up once it's starting to get dark, right? So you would start with, when it comes to watercolor painting, the bright colors, and then you slowly kind of start darkening things down. So it's quite likely he painted some of the brighter colors first, and then kind of layering more and more darker colors over top. So which makes it a very unforgiving medium, because if you make a mistake when you're painting with watercolor, then your only real option is either you really have to kind of embrace that mistake, the happy accident as Bob Ross would say, or you can, worst comes to worst, you could put some white paint over top of it. But what that white paint often does is it sort of just sits right on top, and it doesn't look like the texture of the paper, and it really draws attention to itself. So that's why watercolor paint is it's really nasty. If you make a mistake, it's like it doesn't forgive, right? So that's why I find watercolor so hard, is that I like kind of painting a little bit wild and kind of being very playful. And if I make a mistake, I just put a little white on it and I kind of move on, let it dry, and work on something else, and I come back. Watercolor paint, you can do it, but it's hard to really pull it off properly. Okay, so let's look at this painting again here. I'm going to put a bit of a little cough drop in my mouth, so hopefully I don't make too much clicking and clacking sounds while I do this, because otherwise I don't know if I'll be able to talk through the rest of the episode. Now, I'm looking at this and I feel like I might want to use a regular gray here going on forward. I might find that helpful, because this is very purpley, and I don't mind it so much, but it might be a little bit, it might take actually away from this neon green in the middle. So that's just the first little thought I'm thinking about as I look at this. Okay. So let's mix. I'm going to take a bit of a larger brush here, and we're going to mix this very similar kind of color that we used here for these trees. So in fact, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this warm blue, I'm going to mix it with some warm red, because those two colors are a little bit further away on the color wheel from the cool red. Right, so this already has like now a darker, less intense purple, right? I mean, technically this should be purple, but you can see I put less blue in it, so it's got more of that blood red kind of quality. And let's take a bit of the cool yellow in here. Now we got, actually, this is a quite nice brown. I like this a lot, actually. But I think I'm going to add a little bit more warm blue to it. And I can even just mix it a bit off to the side here. Look at that. So this is a nice dark color. Again, very similar to this one in that it was crossing, all of these colors combined are crossing through the neutral core, giving us a color that is very muted. It's just a very dark color. Add a little more yellow to it. Now we got a brown again. Let's get a little more blue. Get that dark color back. Okay. So I'm going to take this color and let's start painting some branches in the tree and stuff on here. So I'm going to go down this. The way that I'm doing that is I've got my one finger kind of dragging along the surface of or along the side of the painting here. So it's kind of dragging down, and that kind of helps me stabilize my brush. So, because holding your hand directly over the canvas is a little bit tricky. So you can see how using a canvas that has a bit more, that's a little bit more smooth would work really well for this kind of thing. So he would have he may have used white paint in order to get the clumps of snow on this tree trunk. Otherwise, he would have really had to do a lot of drawing and a lot of planning for this picture to pull it off. like I said, I'm using just the regular canvas for this, which is a bit frustrating because I can't get quite as smooth of brush strokes as I'd like. Okay. What on earth is going on with this tree right here, or this branch, and this weird, who on earth? I think this painting was painted in the 1950s or 1940s, 1950s. There was nothing like this painting out there at this time. I'm sure his friends were just like, "Whoa, man, these are weird paintings." And I think he did have, a little bit of trouble selling some of these paintings originally. He did, kind of for a large part of his career, made paintings of like little towns and villages and homes. And I think he made okay money selling those, and he used that money to support himself and his family, but then also make some of these little bit odd paintings on the side. Okay. While I've got some of this paint on my brush here, let's add in some of these other little elements. Okay, so I'm running out of this paint, so I'm just going to mix it again. Am I going to get a slightly different result? Probably. Probably. Although I don't mind so much. I like having that variety in here. I did a pretty good job. Okay. Obviously, there's going to be features of this painting, a lot of features that I'm just not going to be able to do. Right? I'm just going to do as much as I possibly can. I really should be using a smaller brush for some of this here. Some of these branches up here are a little bit too big, eh? Okay. Birchfield is one of those artists that is really, really well known in some circles and totally anonymous or unknown in other circles. He's very well known by some contemporary painters. There was a show of his at the Hammer Museum. I think it was the Hammer Museum in Los Angeles, like 10 years ago, and it got quite a lot of interest. And But I think probably in Canada, he's totally unknown. And, you know, I went to art school down in Los Angeles, so there was plenty of artists there. That was a bit of an eye-opening experience, because in Canada, you know, there's lots of artists that we know that are on postage stamps and coins and celebrated in schools, and you go down and tell some of your American friends about it, and they're like, who? What? That person's famous? They're on a postage stamp? I've never even heard of them. And same sort of thing, you know, we tend to think, well, we're inundated with American culture, we know everything about Americans and as Canadians. But then there are these artists who totally miss the radar. I'd be very surprised if, I know a lot of, there's, let's say, in terms of the audience for the show, probably most are Canadian. I have about 30% of American audience. But these, just so many little details down here that I'm already thinking to myself, you know what? I think I'm going to have to take some of those out, just because if I try to do it all, I'm setting myself up for a bit of failure. So I think I'm going to move on from them. So here's, you know, painting, I love painting trees, because you can do these kind of fun, wavy, wild kind of forms. Let's see. Now, hopefully I'll have some time to kind of go back and add more detail onto these things, but I think for right now I'm going to move a little bit forward. Now, what I'm going to do next is I'm going to paint some of the trees in the background. Now, if I use this exact same dark brown to paint those trees, they're going to look like they're very small trees that are right next to these trees. And I don't want that to happen. I want them to look like they're a little bit further away, further into the background. And one way to do that is by adding a little bit of white or gray to those colors, because that's going to push them back a little bit. It looks like there's atmosphere in between us and those images. So it looks like there's you know, like oxygen and snow and other kinds of things, fog, that are a little bit in between. So I need a little bit more white here. And I think I am going to add just a little bit of black, because that's just going to save me time mixing gray over and over and over again. So I'm going to take my brush, which has the same color I've been using so far. I'm going to mix some of this together here. It's the same color, just got a little bit of white in there instead. So let's paint some of these trees back here. So you see how it already kind of just feels like it's a little bit further away? Let's do the same with this one here. And I'm deliberately trying to allowing the shakiness of my hand to kind of come in here, because I don't want my trees to be perfectly straight. Right? I don't want to use a ruler to draw a tree, otherwise it's going to look too straight and mechanical. It'll look like a fence post. And I want it to have a little bit more of a unique tree-like quality to it. Okay. Now again, there's lots of trees here, and I don't think I'm going to be able to get to all of them. So I'm just going to have to eliminate some of those details. Now I'm going to do these trees are a little bit further away. So again, I'm going to add a little bit more white to this same mixture. We'll see. Hopefully that's not too much white, but got another one here. Goodness, this is a very odd painting, isn't it? The more I look at it, the more I see all these weird little shapes and details in there. It's just like, wow. Who would have thought to have made a painting like this? I'm going to put a few more. They're too much like this gray that I got in the background. So, okay. Now, let's see, what else can I do just looking at it when I got this color on my brush? It's pretty good, I think. Pretty good for right now. Just gonna wash my brush off. I love this stage of the painting. I know for some people this is the scariest part because it looks like you're the furthest away from the end. But I love unfinished paintings. I was writing a book for years. I was working on it about unfinished art because I'm obsessed with ruins and unfinished artworks, and some of the most famous artworks are unfinished. There's a really great Napoleon painting by Jacques-Louis David that is unfinished. There's a great painting by Gilbert Stuart of George Washington that is unfinished. And both of those paintings are really famous and really strong, and because a lot of the times people look at those paintings and they say like, there's some, it's almost like they're showing us the potential of this person, that they are going to grow into the great figure that they're about to become. Of course, we read into artworks like that, but I think that's so much fun. There's a very famous unfinished Michelangelo sculptures. Okay. So what should we do next? I think I'm going to paint a little bit of this fun stuff inside here. Some of these orangey colors in the middle, because we haven't really done any orangey stuff yet. So I'm going to mix. I've got my warm yellow. I'm just going to take a bit of warm red. That was a lot. And just mix this off to the side a bit. There we go. And let's come back to the painting. And I'll paint a bunch of this in here. I don't know at all what the story is behind this painting. If you do, and you can share it in the comments, I'll read it out. I just chose this painting purely because I thought it's kind of fun and bizarre. Again, kind of a little bit of our Halloween theme. Okay. And you know what? There's a lot of this same color down here in the foreground. So, while I got this on my brush, let's just put a bunch of it down here. I'm just going to even paint over a bunch of this stuff. Okay, I'm just taking a quick look around. Is there any more orange of this same ilk here? Okay. A little bit kind of creeping up the tree on the inside. So, I mean, to me, when I look at this painting, it looks like there's some sort of like the world around is very cold, and then inside we have this kind of warm patch, this sunny area on the inside. I'm going to now take the same orange. I'm going to add a little bit of white to it, just like we did with the trees, and just kind of lightening that up a bit to get this next stage. It's kind of much more of a peachy kind of color inside here. Actually, it looks like it kind of goes all the way up. So let's just paint this all the way in here. I'm feeling this is great. Actually, doing this, I was strongly contemplating not filming today's episode, or just kind of calling in sick because I am sick. But this is actually is very positive for me, because I feel like I'm taking my mind off of how I feel. So, which is one of the great things with painting, and the reason why there's art therapy programs in hospitals and veterans programs, and because it really does offer like the most positive kind of distraction from life. Like, not only is the act of painting satisfying, but when you have something done at the end of the day, you feel like you've been productive. Okay, now what else in this wild painting are we going to do? There's lots of green that I want to tackle. Maybe before I go to the green, I'm just going to get a little bit more red on my brush and do some of these red highlights. So I'm still using this orange and the white, taking a little bit of that, because I don't want to go this red right out of the tube. The warm red is really intense, and sometimes people are like, okay, well, I'm going to use that, and then wow, just too strong. And then they end up doing, spending a lot of time trying to integrate that bright color into the picture. So all these kind of weird fiery shapes on these trees. It almost looks like these trees are on fire, doesn't it? You'll notice how I'm painting this. In order to get those kind of sharp points, what I'm doing, first of all, when I get my paint on the brush, I take it and then I spin it, and that's going to help me get a sharper kind of point. And then as I'm painting, I kind of start from the outside and then move towards the center, right? So I kind of start, and I can kind of push the brush down to widen it or flatten it. The more I look at this painting, it's just so interesting. It's so weird and wild. Okay. Oh, I just saw a really generous comment there from Donna in the comments. I started painting again because of anxiety and depression. All of my art is therapy for me. You probably don't realize how you help me. That's so sweet. Thank you so much for saying that. I really do appreciate that, Donna. That's, you know, making paintings is just such a relaxing... I mean, obviously, when you first start painting or trying any kind of thing for the first time, it's difficult and you kind of struggle and it's frustrating. You kind of have to almost push through that a little bit, and then when you realize the stakes are really low, like if this painting doesn't turn out, like what's, like no one died in the making of this painting, like there's maybe there's $1.25 worth of canvas, and I've probably spent $6 worth of paint so far, right? No more than a really nice, you know, frosted cappuccino pumpkin latte at Starbucks, right? And yet, ultimately, if this painting turns out really well and I want to hang it on my wall, like $6 for a piece of artwork is, you know, that's a great deal. Like, where can you get a great piece of artwork for that kind of a deal? Okay, I think this area is dry, so I'm putting my finger down to hold the canvas. Just makes it a little bit easier than hovering my finger right over here. You know, I think probably most people who are doing these classes are not interested in, you know, ever exhibiting their art or, you know, becoming a famous painter. They're just looking for some kind of a diversion, to have a hobby that is fulfilling. And and in that sense, like, again, because sometimes people get really hard on themselves and their paintings don't turn out, and you know, I don't think many people go for a bike ride to kind of blow off steam, and at the end of the day come back and like, oh, I had a really bad bike ride. I was hoping to go really, really fast, and I think people are like, oh, I was able to go, and I kind of smelt the flowers along the way. I stopped and had a little picnic, and that was really nice. And there were some little birds that I was, feeding. And so if you're in that kind of mindset where you're just having a pleasant time and not being so focused on the results, then what ends up happening is often you're surprised by the results. Like when you let go of the desire to kind of create something outstanding and mind-bogglingly beautiful and better than anything else you've done in your life, you're usually surprised when your expectations are a little bit lower. Okay. So, I'm probably, this is going to be a little bit of a longer episode, I imagine. I'll probably go a little bit over 6. I always try not to, but whenever I say we've got 15 minutes done, I can always add another half hour to that. But I'm having a blast painting this, and it's helping me because I'm not feeling well. So I'm going to see it through to the end here. Okay. So just as I want to paint a little bit of this red that's further away, I'm not going to use this red right out of the tube, or that I've already mixed. I'm adding a little more white to it to, again, make it look a little bit further away. So I just have to be careful. Some of this is still a bit wet. And, some of these brush strokes I'm doing are a little bit wider, and they're a little bit sloppy, to be quite frank, because I'm kind of up against a bit of a time deadline. If I was really kind of focused on doing a really, really, really good job, I would take my time, and I would maybe do this over 2 or 3 sessions, and, I'd be really, I'd spend a lot of time trying to get all of these little, I don't know, they kind of look like flames or whatever. I'd really try to get them right. Sorry, I gotta have another one of these cough drops, otherwise I'll have to turn my microphone off for me hacking. Aha! Some of these different. I'll never get the wrapping off that one. Okay. And again, I am not painting this exactly the way he did it here. I realize some of the stuff I'm doing right now is a little bit different, but I know there's no way I can do a lot of the other details here that quick in this amount of time. So I'm like, okay, well, what can I do in some of these places? Well, I can do these same sort of flame kind of things here, and I could do that. Kind of fill up this space a little bit, and they kind of look neat anyway, so. And always remember that the painting that you're working on has to stand on its own. Right? It doesn't matter what the original one looked like. Unless you're going to print out a copy of the original and put it right next to this one, no one's going to know. I mean, maybe somebody, you could tell them what it is, and maybe they'll Google it, and they'll pull up the image, and they can go, oh, yeah, I can see where you made some of the changes. But how many people are going to do that? And even if they do that, do you think they're going to be disappointed in you? They're going to say, well, you didn't, it looks like you moved a few details out of that. No, 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 no. I guess we can't be friends anymore. I mean, and if they said that, then you'd be like, oh, okay, well, thank you for showing me who you really are, because that's a pretty absurd thing to say. Doing this kind of grassy things there. There's some kind of... Let's put these on top. Whatever they are. And then in the center, what on earth is this thing here? I'll I don't know what that is. I don't know, but it's kind of funny. I don't know what this... I could turn it into something if I wanted, but I'll just keep it like that. I probably could have used a little bit more white on there to... In fact, I'm just going to do just that. Lighten it up even more, because it was so intense. There we go. Now it's not screaming for so much attention. Okay. Now I think the main thing we're missing is some green. Right, we've got this neon yellowy kind of lime green. So I think what we're going to do is we're going to mix some of the more greenish. So we have a greenish yellow. Now we're going to mix a green here, and let's just clean the brush a bit. So to make that, I'm still just going to use my cool blue and cool yellow. So it's the same color that I did originally in the background. I'm just going to make this one more green and less yellow. So it just means there's more blue in there. I am erring on the side of more yellow, especially to start, because it's going to be easier for me to darken this green than it will be to lighten this green later on. And I think I'm going to go to a smaller brush. So I often use a larger brush to mix my color, and then I go to a smaller brush to actually apply the color. So, whew, what is he doing here? It looks like, let's move the water out of the way. If there's a bit of this green up in these clouds, and I can make that all work later on. In these beams of light, there's some green. And I can come back later on and apply some white to the yellow to really make it like this, the sunlight really pop when we get there. I'm not crossing over the painting the whole time. So it's funny, like this painting is so weird that I keep thinking to myself, like trying to find the logic of it and how to paint this so that it makes sense. And then I realize it doesn't really make any sense. Like this is his own weird logic that he used to make the painting, and that actually gives me a lot more freedom to paint it, because you know there's this green beam in the middle of the sky. Like, of course it doesn't make any sense. So just allow myself just to be a little bit more loose and kind of have a little fun and play around here. So again, we have these kind of almost like the flames of this grass, or this green coming up into here. Let's make sure we got that. So here's these, I don't know what all this is in here, this kind of glowing space in the middle of these trees where and as I'm going forward, I'm trying to make these little, I don't know, U shapes or humps or whatever, just a little bit bigger as I get a little closer to us, so that the ones further away are a little bit smaller. And I'll darken them up as well later on. Okay. Head in the way, sorry. So like I said off the top there, I find this artist super inspiring because of his weirdness. All right, you know, there's nothing like his art out there really before or since. If anything, the closest person that I can think of that did stuff in a way is like Emily Carr that we talked about. We did a painting of hers before. Her paintings, especially her latter paintings, that she did up in Haida Gwaii, or what used to be known as the Queen Charlotte Islands, you know, which have been embraced by everyone in Canada, and we see them all over the place. Those paintings are also very weird if you really think about them. They're, I think she does a great job of showing the weight of the, you know, like the moss on the trees. But they're really unlike any landscapes that anyone else has really done before or since. I mean, they have some similarities to some of the stuff that her contemporaries like Lauren Harris, members of the group of 7, were doing. They also had a very kind of solid way of painting the landscape. But she was just really blazing her own trail, like just painting in a way. And she wasn't overly happy with her artwork at times. I think because it was a little bit weird, but it didn't stop her from making it. She still went along and just kept on painting away, and even though there were weird paintings that, you know, especially at first, were not selling at all, she just kept doing her thing, and slowly the world came around to her, and just kind of vindicated for doing it. Now there's a lot of these little green branches, or maybe pine needles and things in this tree. I don't know if I'll have a chance to do all of that. Wow, what a weird painting I'm making today, hey? I love it. Okay. So eventually I'm going to come back with some white in this yellow and touch up that sky. Okay. Let's go down here a little bit. And I'm not going to be able to do too much here. Maybe, yeah, I'm going to darken these. I like that, the way that looks. Okay. Yeah, I mean, this is not a color I was planning on putting here. It just sort of came out on my brush as I started applying it, and then it's like, oh, actually, I kind of like that look. So I'm just going to go with it. So this is just the same green, but just a bit more blue in there. get these nice sharp lines, and the paint is starting to dry a bit. I've got a heater on, trying to keep my body warm here to fend off this cold, and it's clearly drying my paint faster than I had hoped. So I'm just getting a little bit of a darker green, putting a lot more blue in there. And I'm just going to apply some of this, a little bit of a darker green. I'm going to be a bit careful about where I put this because it's pretty intense. It might be the only places I put it is just right down here. Whoa, I didn't realize. Look how time flew. Okay. So I think what I'm going to do is now I'm going to mix some gray. I'm going to put some gray on a lot of this painting in the background, touch up the foreground here. And then I'm going to get darker and darker grays for some of this background, and then that will bring us pretty close towards the end of this painting. So I'm going to wash my brush. Two brushes to wash here. Whenever I see a brush that's been sitting out for a long time and I haven't washed it, like, oh, I better take care of that right now, because I don't want to have to go buy a new brush tomorrow if I don't have to. So I'm going to mix a gray, and rather than especially since I'm up against a bit of a time crunch here, I'm just going to use my black and my white to make this paint. Okay, nice simple gray. I'm going to add a little bit of water to it though, just to dilute it a little bit so when I paint over other parts of the painting that those parts still shine through a little bit. And it's also going to make it a little bit easier for me to paint with as well. So, let's see. It's a little white up there. So let's come down to where we do need a bit more of a, I'm not sure, this is a shadow. That was supposed to be a shadow. Let's just correct that here. Okay, this is the ground. This should be darker there, okay. Okay, I got this lighter gray, so I'm just gonna put this a little bit higher up into these clouds. In fact, let's go. There are some places in the sky where it's kind of shining through, so I'll get a bit of that. So I'm going to have to touch up the trees just a little bit as I come to them. Oh yes, this big area right here, that needs to be a little bit lighter, doesn't it? I could have left that area on the inside darker, but didn't think of it while I was painting it, so it's gone. Now again, there's these clumps on the tree here. Put a bit of that. Just a little bit more white on the brush for some of these parts, because I need to be able to show up against the dark background that I have. And since I got a lot more white on it, we can come back down here and some of these areas. Just adding a bit more white. Okay. Now I'm just going to add a little bit more black to my gray. And you know what? I'm going to add a little tiny bit of blue to it. Just to give that gray a little bit of life. There we go. You know, the more and more I look at this painting, there's more and more things that I want to do. I'm just not going to be able to do it all, which is totally fine. We're just going to do as much as we can. Bring this painting to a place where we can be happy with it, and then we can walk away. Going to mix it a little bit more here. Okay, I got some shadows. Notice how I haven't gone too dark with my gray. I can always darken it, and I will, but I didn't want to go straight there right away. I just want to be kind of careful that because otherwise, especially towards the end of the painting, you know, it is easier to sort of tell you, oh, I'm just gonna go like, let's get real dark. But then once you put that dark color on, and you're kind of like it's there, and you got to deal with it. So I am gonna we'll make a slightly darker version of just what we just did. Okay, and then I'm going to use a smaller brush to apply it. This color works really well for some of the just little shadows on the paint, on the okay, great. Just gonna back it off a bit. A little bit too dark for. Oh, my eyes are starting to go a little bit cross-eyed. So kind of starting to reach my my end point, what my body will tolerate here. I'm going to take a bit of, mixed a lot more, I'll just show you, a lot more black into this mixture, gray, and I'm going to put that on the tree. Some of these marks they're really pretty subtle. But it's that subtlety in the painting that really pushes it over the top and makes it more believable. that work better? Oops. Not sure what happened. Thank you, everybody, for pointing that out. My microphone was not working. What's kind of fun about this painting is it's a little bit like, you know, there's this, again, cold, wintry climate, and then around it, or inside of it, is this kind of little space of warmth, and, you know, it does look a little bit strange inside there. But for me, it kind of feels, you know, sometimes that's what we want, is just a little cozy place amongst the storm to curl up and relax, especially when you're not feeling well. And just a few more little spots of snow. I'm super intrigued to see what people did if they painted this one along with me, to see your results. I know people have sent me some Facebook messages recently, and I haven't had a chance to reply. And maybe you sent in your images from last week. I just, as I said, haven't been feeling too well, so I haven't had a chance to get to them. It doesn't mean that I won't, it's just a little bit delayed. Okay. Just going to touch up that beam of light from the sun. So to do that, I'm going to take some of the cool yellow, and let's just make another clean little place over here. So there's a bit of gray in there. So I had gray on my brush. It wasn't just white, so I am just going to clean my brush up a bit. There we go. Nice clean brush. Let's try this again and get some of that yellow. Dig in here to the white. He's got some of these kind of like radiating beams. Next week's painting is going to be a bit more of a simple painting, so it won't take us nearly as long to complete it. It's by another one of my favorite artists. Every artist that we're painting is one of my favorites. I'm totally selfish. I'm painting art by artists that I like. And also artists that I think other people should like, but also artists that I think are making art that is achievable for anyone to paint. This one might appear to be a little bit more complicated, but I don't think it's out of the range of the possibility for a beginner. You know, it might take you a little bit longer than me. You might have to simplify things a little bit in order to pull it off, but I don't think it's a deal breaker. And if anything, in fact, choosing a little bit a painting that's like this, that's a little bit more bizarre or weird, just is liberating, because you can add your own stamp to it and kind of play and have fun. And hey, if it turns out a little bit weird or strange, I mean, it can't be any weirder than the original, right? I'm just going to get a little bit of the yellow on my brush. It's blending a little bit into the white that's there, so ideally I would let this dry and then put this yellow in afterwards, but I'm going to wrap up here in just a couple minutes. So the other thing I'm doing is I am resisting the urge to paint on them after I finish them. So I'm not going back in and touching them up or adding anything new to them. So that I try to really get them done in a short period of time. And this bush could be glowing a little bit more, and I could add some white in order to make that happen, but I think it's pretty much as good as as it's going to get, unless I really start digging into the weeds here to pull it off. Do I dare? I start thinking to myself, oh, I'm going to do this and that, and then I think, you know what? I think it's pretty good right now, Michael. If we start digging around, and that's like what I started doing a little bit of that last week with the Frida Kahlo, and then ended up having to spend another extra half hour kind of bringing things to some resolution. Okay. What do you think about that? That feels pretty good. I can live with this. I can live with this. I can sign my name on it. Okay. So let's get up. Where's my pencil? There's my pencil. And oh, let's see. I was just about to say that I misspelt his name earlier. Birch. This is a good lesson to try not to speak while you're writing. Yes, like Donna says, my spooky Halloween picture. Okay, everybody. Well, thank you for tuning in and watching another one of these episodes. I would love to see the results of your own painting if you were painting along with me. You could send those to my social media below, the Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, either as a direct message or you post it and then tag me on your picture using a hashtag or the @ symbol depending on the platform. If you felt this was also helpful and you'd like to support me with a small donation, you can use PayPal, which is you can write down below, and you just use your credit card through PayPal, and you could send $1, $5, $5,000, $1 billion. No donation will be rejected. There's also the super chat function right next to where you send in the comments. There's a little $sign there, and if you've given your payment information to Google so that you can watch YouTube videos, you can also do that. You can share the video to your friends on your social media by, putting a link to this video on your Facebook or etc. I won't go through all the different ones that are out there. Yeah, I don't think I have anything else to say. I've got about another minute left of my voice before it goes out. So thanks again, everybody. I really appreciate everybody tuning in. This is great supportive comments, and the wonderful community of people that we've created here makes me so happy. So enjoy your weekend. Have a happy, spooky Halloween. Maybe by celebrating this picture, hanging it up with your spiders and cobwebs. We will see you next week at same time, same place for another painting. We're going to be talking about Chris O'Feely, one of the great contemporary artists, going from an artist that is no longer with us to an artist that is very much with us. One of the major, stars of the art world these days, Chris O'Feely. And we will see you then. So thanks, everybody. Have yourself a wonderful rest of your evening, and take care. And stay well if you can. Bye-bye.